The PSBA is committed to diversity, inclusion, and equity work. As an organization based in Tacoma, Washington, we acknowledge the Puyallup tribe and invite you to visit the official website of the Puyallup and listen to their land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional homelands of the Puyallup tribe. The Puyallup people have lived on and stewarded these lands since the beginning of time and continue to do so today. We recognize that this land acknowledgement is one small step toward true allyship, and we commit to uplifting the voices, experiences, and histories of the Indigenous people of this land and beyond.
Thank you so much, Lori. And I'm Jane Carlin. Welcome, everyone. We are ending our 2024 Zoom conversations on a very high note because today we welcome a papermaker extraordinaire, Helen Hiebert. And it is a pleasure to introduce Helen with the help of my fellow PSBA friend and member, Gina Pizzello, who had the opportunity to join Helen on her extraordinary trip to Japan this past summer.
Thank you for including me, Jane. So I've been playing with paper my whole life, first making simple flowers as a child and eventually finding my way into book arts as an adult. So you can imagine how excited I was to be given the opportunity to join Helen and 9 other artists to go on a trip to Japan for 11 days, where we got to visit mills and shrines and museums and even artist studios and meet several artists. I've always admired Helen's work, and the trip was a unique experience to learn about papermaking in Japan, to see firsthand the amazing artistry and craftsmanship of the Japanese artisans.
Okay. I'm sure for most of you, Helen needs no introduction, but we would be remiss without sharing some background on her many accomplishments. Her studio is located in Red Cliff, Colorado, where she produces handmade paper and hosts retreats. In 2022, she was included in the North American Hand Papermaking Hall of Fame. She's the author of several books about paper, including Papermaking with Garden Plants and Common Weeds, Paper Illuminated, and Art of Papercraft. And I first met Helen when she lived in Portland, and she was kind enough to travel to the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma to teach students in my class on William Morris about papermaking. I still remember her arriving with paper pulp containers, decals, molds, sponges, and rags to introduce our students to the art of papermaking. And in fact, Helen, I still have some of that wonderful paper that we made. I keep it close to me whenever I'm working with students. And as Gina shared, Helen's accomplishments are so vast. And in addition to her workshops and books, she maintains an active blog, the Sunday paper, a podcast, Paper Talk, and a YouTube channel, as well as a Facebook group entitled The Paper Studio. And her Paper Year subscription club offers the opportunity to learn papermaking skills each month in a supportive community. I don't know how you do it, Helen. You are so organized and contribute so much. Gina?
Thank you.
And I first met Helen in 2016 when she came to San Diego to teach a workshop. I think it was one of your paper and light workshops, but I'm not quite sure. And we kind of hit it off at that workshop. And I started following her Sunday paper and learned about the Paper Year calendar, which was the forerunner to her current online Paper Year course. And I started making the projects in the calendar, but I would interpret them a little bit. I would do my own thing. And Helen contacted me and was like, oh, I like what you're doing with this. Would you like to do a project for one of my future calendars? So I think it was the 2019 calendar that I did a project for. And then you asked me to also be, to participate in the Art of Papercraft with a project. And it was through all of those interactions that I learned, well, I guess I read on your blog about your trip to Japan in 2019 when you went to visit your son. And when you came back, you were so excited you wanted to do a paper tour. And a bunch of us said, hey, if you're doing it, let me know. And it turned out that like everyone who said yes in 2019, we kind of were still the ones interested in 2023 when after the pandemic and everything, you were able to get it all together. So like I said, the plans came together for the trip to go this June. And we just met so many passionate people on that trip who cared so deeply about what they were making and what they were doing on a daily basis in terms of paper making and paper craft. And it was just such an inspiration, not only to meet the artisans in Japan, but to meet my fellow travelers, because a lot of them are also paper makers and artists of accomplishment. And it was a magical trip. And I'm sure all of you will get that understanding after Helen's presentation or during her presentation. So take it away.
Thanks, Gina. So we've already talked about Helen's many awards and exhibitions, but a fun fact that you might not know about Helen, and I hope you don't mind, Helen, but I still find your appearance on Sesame Street back in 1997 one of the most charming introductions to papermaking ever, and no doubt inspired a new generation of paper makers. On Helen's website, she states her goal is to make paper come alive through art, collaboration, education, and innovation. We can't wait to hear about that, Helen. Thank you so much. Please join me in welcoming Helen Hiebert.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Gina. That was so nice. I'm going to start with a little story about that Sesame Street clip because I gave a keynote presentation last month at the North American Hand Paper Makers Conference in Denver. And I did not show that film. I do show it sometimes, the Sesame Street video in lectures, but I didn't. But at the end, someone asked me about it. And then after my talk, this young woman who's studying at the University of Iowa came up to me and she said, I saw that film, but I've been racking my brain because she's studying at the University of Iowa, paper making and book arts. And she couldn't remember where she'd seen it as a child, but that inspired her to end up at the University of Iowa. And she Googled it because I said, you can Google papermaking on Sesame Street and see my video. And it was that video she remembered. So that was really touching that she saw it as a child in 1997 and is now studying papermaking and book arts. So yes, in June of this year, I had this wonderful opportunity to take a group to Japan. And this is just a quick overview. This was called the Japan Paper Tour. And by the way, a lot of the places I'm talking about are mentioned in a blog post that I wrote after the tour. And the link to that is in the chat. So if there's like a specific place you're interested in, it's likely you can find it in that blog post. So we started at the very bottom here at Kansai International Airport. Everybody arrived there. And then we went all the way to the top to the Route Inn Takefu Interhotel in Echizen. And then we did this little jog up over to the right to Mino. And then we ended up in Kyoto, which is that red dot on the Google map picture. So before I get into the tour, I just wanted to tell you how I got into paper. And I grew up in Texas, and my father was a professor at Texas A&M, and he did research in Los Alamos, New Mexico. This was in the 70s, so way after the war. He was a nuclear physicist, though, but studying nuclear energy. And we spent a lot of holidays there. We lived there for 6 months twice. We lived there for a year once. And I got to see these brown paper bag luminaria that would line rooftops and driveways during the holiday season. And I love paper and light still today. Anybody who follows me knows that. And this was the inspiration. When I ended up, I studied art in college at the University of the South in Tennessee. It's called Sewanee also. And I spent my junior year abroad in Germany in this beautiful fairy tale house. I lived in one little room in that house, not the whole thing. And I took a class at the university there. It was an exchange program, and I was at the art school in Mainz. And I took a class called Paper. And we made paper in a blender. We constructed pop-ups and we made furniture with cardboard. And I really became inspired with paper as a material. This is what I'm still interested in today. I discovered the work of Masahiro Chitani way back then. He's a Japanese architect, and he did these cut paper pieces where you would cut and fold but not remove any of the sheet of paper. And I thought that was so cool. And I ended up developing these sculptures for my senior thesis in college. And I moved to New York after college, and a year or two later, my parents went to Japan. My father was doing some research over there, and my mother invited me to go travel with her. And I was amazed. We stayed at this traditional inn, and there were shoji screens everywhere, and light filtering through those paper-covered folding screens set the course for my work with handmade paper. I observed how this simple architectural form majestically altered the space, and I decided then and there I was going to learn to make paper by hand. And so I made this screen on the right a few years later. I always thought, oh, those shoji screens are just square, which makes sense because wood is straight, right? And I wanted to make something with curvy panels. And this is way more impractical process. And I found this book early on, and I actually built some shoji screens for my little loft in my bedroom in New York City. And I called this guy, Jay Van Arsdale, the author of this book, and asked him about going to Japan and learning how to make shoji screens. That never happened, but it's a fun memory. I was looking for ways to go to Japan to learn how to make paper because I had no idea anyone did it in America. But in doing research, I discovered Dudone Paper Mill, and I ended up working there for 6 years. This is a hand paper making facility right in New York City. It's currently in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and it's coming up on its 50th anniversary. I lived in New York for 11 years, so for right after college until my mid-30s. And I don't remember how I discovered the Isamu Noguchi Museum and Garden. It's in Long Island City, but I discovered it and I went there many times. And it's a beautiful place you can still visit. And Noguchi was a stone sculptor, and this museum is his old studio. And he also designed these Akari lanterns, which are beautiful, these beautiful Japanese collapsible lanterns. And by coincidence, a friend of mine learned how to construct these and knew I would be interested. So she taught me. This was back in New York City. And then I have been teaching how to make these collapsible chochin lanterns for years. And this is just a shot from a workshop I taught. So Gina mentioned this, but in 2019, my son went to Japan. He is interested in the Japanese language and studied Japanese in college. And his name is Will. He's there on the left. And my husband, Ted, on the right. We went to visit him. He was there for part of his junior year. And I wanted to go to a papermaking village. I knew I needed someone to guide me because I do not speak Japanese. And so this is Nick Cladis, who's currently at the University of Iowa, and he helped me with my tour. So in this picture, we are in my studio. His mother happens to live in Colorado. So this was after I met him, but I knew I was going to Japan. I was thinking, how can I find anyone to give me a tour? And I saw this Facebook post of a woman who was in Echizen, which is one of the towns we traveled to. And I Facebook messaged her and asked her if she was going to be there in a couple of weeks. And she said, no, but you should contact Nick. And so Nick is an American who had been living in Echizen for 6 years. And I contacted him and he said, sure, I'll show you around. And he met my husband and me at the train station and gave us this amazing tour for a day in Echizen. And it just sparked the idea in me. He's such a lovely person. We hit it off that maybe I could bring a group to Japan. I knew I could find people to go. And I just thought, well, Nick would be the perfect tour guide. So also on that trip, I had arranged to meet Sarah Breyer. She's an American who is married to a Japanese man, and she's lived in Kyoto for 40 years. And I had met her at Dudonné Paper Mill in New York. So she used to come there and make work there once a year or something like that. And so I knew she was in Kyoto, asked if we could come visit her in her studio. So we did that. This was still 2019. And then another thing I really wanted to do was to see these collapsible lanterns being made. And Richard Flavin was living in, he's now deceased. He was a paper maker though, very renowned woodblock printer, and made his own paper and lived in Tokyo. And I asked everyone, where could I find Japanese lantern making? And he gave me the name of this place. And so my husband and I went to visit, and this, it's a tiny room. This doesn't really give you that great of a view, but that on the left, you see, you walk in, and it's just this small space, and it's packed with all of these pieces and parts. And 4 people were working in there, and it was really crowded. And I felt nervous in there because I was taking away from their work time. So we were only in there maybe 10 minutes. And when we left, my husband said something like, "Wow, that was kind of a dump. Was that even worth it?" And I was like, that was the highlight of my career. Like, this is something I've been doing, and I got to see how they did it. Like, it was amazing. So the tour. So I flew over a week early with 2 people on the tour, Linda Armstrong on the left and Jill Powers on the right. And we spent a week together, sort of acclimating and getting used to the time zone. And we spent a couple of days in Tokyo, and then hidden amongst some 3,000 mostly uninhabited islands in the Seto Inland Sea, there lies this cluster of islands filled with surreal art installations, cutting-edge museums, and architectural gems. This is the Teshima Art Museum. And there's just tons of art on these islands. It's definitely worth a visit. I had heard about it before. That's why I decided, oh, I want to go there. And this is a Christian Boltanski outdoor piece. If you look closely, you'll see countless wind chimes that are installed in the forest, tinkling in the breeze. On strips of translucent material hanging from each bell are the names of loved ones written by past visitors. The sound of the wind chime summons up the mystery of the soul, paying homage to the memory of those individuals, expressing both the vitality and transience of human life. And of course, we had to visit the 2 Yayoi Kusama pumpkins on Naoshima, which is the island we stayed on. And then our group converged at Kansai Airport's Hotel Nikko, where we had dinner together and spent our first night. Only one person was late, but she got there by the next morning. And there were 10 participants plus me. And on the left, you see Masa Fujiwara, who was our guide. And Masa is the husband of Sarah Breyer. So this is, things just started coming together in terms of planning this trip after I met Nick. And Nick ended up getting a job in Iowa. He was living full-time in Japan. I thought, oh, great, he can just do this whole tour. But he couldn't do the whole tour. So you'll see it's going to unfold. But so then I thought, well, I need a guide. And I knew Sarah's husband was a guide. So I started talking to him, and he arranged all of our hotels and train and things like that. And he guided us in Kyoto. So we'll get back to him. And we were from all over the country, probably half from Colorado, which is where I live now. So we traveled by train just 3 times during the tour to get to our 3 main destinations. We spent 3 days in Echizen. And these are the 3 main paper-making plants. So this is at Igarashi Mill. So that was Kozo you just saw. This is Mitsumata. And Gampi is not easy to cultivate, so they are trying to cultivate it. So those are the 3 main paper-making fibers that are used in Japanese paper-making. Now I'm going in chronological order, so you're going to see different parts of the process in different orders. So here's paper drying rather than making paper at the beginning, but this is the next mill we visited. So we visited 3 mills a day for 2 days, and then we did something else the 3rd day. So at Yamaguchi Mill, we met the husband and wife team and their apprentice who create gorgeous single and double layer sheets that are all board dried on these old boards made from the ginkgo tree that give the paper a distinctive finish. And there was a lot of talk about how these boards are no longer made. A lot of these, paper making is a dying tradition. And we were lucky to visit these 6 mills. I think there are something like 60 mills still in Echizen, but back in the day there were hundreds. There are a lot of fun surprises that happen when you travel, and this was one. This woman was biking down the street that we were walking on between mills, and she knew Nick, and she stopped, and she had this paper that he's holding in her basket. She gave us this little batch of paper, which we distributed and shared, and she sang a fantastic paper making song to us. She serenaded us. This is a manhole cover in Echizen. If you look carefully, you can see a woman pulling a sheet of paper. It takes a minute to get your eyes going, but the red is her top, and she's leaning over a vat of pulp and dipping into the vat. And the manhole covers in Japan are all distinctive. So this was our last mill the first day, Taki Mill. We all got to try spraying into the pulp of a huge sheet of paper. So there's already pulp on that screen, and he is spraying into it to remove some pulp and disperse the fibers so that it becomes visible later. And here you can see Nick had a relationship with Taki, and he's spraying him. And you can see a little bit more. Everyone took a turn squirting into that sheet of paper. You can kind of see how the fiber has been moved around on that screen. And then they were making this large sheet and showing us how they pour that blue pulp onto the white pulp. And some of the mills were really small and some were really big. This is an example of a large mill. And that afternoon, we visited the Okamoto Otaki Shrine. This is the only shrine in Japan to be dedicated to the Kawakami Gozen, the goddess of paper. So here we were washing our hands, and then everyone gave an offering at the shrine. And you can note those little white things hanging are folded paper. So paper is a big part of Japanese life, not just paper making. The old woodwork is intricate and really quite intact for how old it is. And there'd been a festival recently, and these stone lanterns have candles inside. You can just see on the right, you see the candle. I'm holding up the paper, and they cover these little windows with paper during the festival time, so they glow at night. The next day, we started at Yanase Mill, where we just gaped at these 2 young paper makers working in tandem to create huge sheet after huge sheet. And you can see in Japanese paper making, this is different than Western, they have those two chains coming down in the middle that are helping to hold some of the weight. And here, so now they're going to unclip those chains and move the sheet over and couch it onto a pile of the sheets they've already made. And you can't see it in the video, but there's a piece of string that they lay that delineates between the sheets of paper. So they do all stick together, but they're still independent sheets so that they can take them apart later in the day. Just imagine doing that all day long. And this was something unique I'd never seen. If you look at the guy on the left here, he's sucking air bubbles out of the sheets of paper. He's got a tube in his mouth. And then the woman on the right is just doing some repairs by hand. So after every sheet is made, they just look over it to see if there are any imperfections. Next, we visited Osada Mill, where the proprietor shared several of his techniques with us. Many of these mills create large sheets for Fusuma door panels and other interiors, such as lighting and wallpaper. Our third mill that day was Ryozo, where they make paper by hand and then utilize a conveyor belt system. Look at the woman at the top there. She's pulling a dry sheet off. So they make a handmade sheet, couch it onto this conveyor belt, and then it goes through a pressing and drying process and comes out pretty quickly. This is a lace paper technique. So this is a metal screen that's put on top of a wet sheet of paper. And now he's spraying over the metal and dispersing the fibers that are underneath it. And then he lifts that off. You can just kind of see there's some handles on the top sticking up. And this is the resulting wet sheet. So I just did a close-up right there on the floor. And probably many of you have seen these kinds of lace papers. They come in different patterns. That's how they're created. Here we are at the end of the tour. You can see Eric there is holding several tubes. He's made a purchase. These mills all had little shops, and I think they were overwhelmed at how much we wanted to purchase and support them. So we spent quite a bit of time shopping at the end of each tour. And on our final day in Echizen, we divided into two groups and split our time between learning how to make Japanese paper at the Udatsu Paper and Craft Museum and visiting several paper shops in the village. Each participant got to try their hand at making 2 large sheets of paper, which definitely takes some getting used to. Here's Karen stirring the vat. And Diane is getting some help in forming a sheet of paper. And then, as I said, we spent the rest of the day, we split into 2 groups, and people were shopping and visiting another museum and paper shops. And this was a wonderful paper making diorama that was in just outside one of the paper shops. And then there were 4 or 5 paper shops in this small town. This is just a view into one of them. So then we were off to Mino. And just a little backstory, I'll show a picture of our guide in Mino in a minute, but Andrew Dewar is an origami artist, and he joined my Facebook group. Jane mentioned I have a Facebook group called the Paper Studio 3 or 4 years ago, and I learned that he lived in Gifu, which is near Mino, and I knew this was the area where Isamu Noguchi had been invited. So he's the light designer that I showed earlier in my slideshow. So he was invited by the mayor of Mino, and it might have been Gifu, I get it mixed up, in 1951 to revitalize their traditional lanterns. So they were already making lanterns using this technique, but Noguchi gave them an uplift. And so when I learned that Andrew lived there, I asked him whether he would be willing to help me organize this part of the tour, and he was. So he took us to the Ozeki factory, which is where the lanterns that Noguchi designed are still manufactured today. It's a huge building. I really wanted to get into the factory part, but I couldn't get permission. So this is just the shop. If you look lower down, you see the traditional Gifu lanterns, and then the ones at the top are Noguchi's lanterns. And so then Andrew took us to this shop in Kawaramachi called Gifu Wagasa. And they are making these beautiful old traditional umbrellas. This used to be how they made umbrellas, but now today these are art pieces. And just stunning, one after the next. That woman was opening for like 10 or 15 minutes. Now, and there was this display on the wall across from where she was about Noguchi. And it was the story of him visiting the town back in the 1950s. And on the right, you can see that that's a fire tower. He actually got inspiration for the stands for his lanterns from those fire towers. And then we got to step into the workshop and meet a young craftsman who prepares the bamboo parts for the umbrellas. So he spent his days splitting bamboo. And they talked about how, what he made. Off to the left in the back, you see stacks. That's probably for 2 umbrellas. Those then get sent somewhere else and they do the next step. And so they're not doing all of the steps in one place. We stayed at Nipponia, a traditional old Japanese complex comprised of 10 rooms. This was another place. Masa found this place. He's our guide in Kyoto. And washi, or Japanese paper, is a product that has been long produced in Mino, along with the lights. And in addition to being prominently featured throughout the hotel's interior in the form of wallpaper, sliding doors, and lampshades, many of the rooms showcased washi artwork. And this was our breakfast each morning. They brought it to my room, and we all had breakfast together. And then on the first morning, everybody came in and was like, "Oh my gosh, you have to see my room." So we took a little tour through all of the rooms, seeing different lighting, different woodwork, little garden views. This is a traditional chochin, one of those lanterns that's been sitting there for years, covered with dirt, falling apart. Shoji screens, and here's some paper art. So that was really fun. And then by coincidence, another coincidence, I know an artist, Jane Ingram Allen. She's in California. And I was in touch with her, said I was going to Japan. I knew she'd been in Japan. She'd been in Mino, in fact, and she knew this woman, Akiko. And she said I should get in touch. And Akiko happens to be a tour guide in Mino. So she met us, gave us all brochures, and took us to a couple of places, and then pointed out where we should go on our own later in the day. So Mino has several paper and lantern shops. And this is a demonstration by, let me get her name. You see she's making one of those collapsible chochin lanterns. And she was very friendly. She spoke English. Hideka Kano. And she gave us this lively demonstration showing how she made the armature and how she put the paper panels on. And then at the end, I don't have a video of this, but she took the paper off of the armature and collapsed the paper lantern. So Mino has an annual paper lantern competition, and it also has a museum or gallery, Mino Washi Akari Art Gallery, which is filled with innovative designs like this. And I do hope to go to Japan again, and I would like to go when the Lantern Festival is taking place. They have an annual festival in October. And now this is Andrew on the right, Andrew Dewar, who was our guide in Mino. And he is origami expert and makes things that fly. So here are a couple of his designs. It's a little walking chick and then a paper airplane. And we all tried something. And we flew them. It's funny what you don't think to take pictures of. You can't really tell what this is, but this is at that Nipponia where we stayed. There was a huge paper shop, very modern. And so you're looking, I'm upstairs looking at all these Akari lights, and then down below is the paper store, and there are lots of flat files with paper in the drawers. And this place is called Washinari. And then we went to Kyoto, and Masa was our guide in Kyoto, and he planned a three-day itinerary of historic sites in the mornings, leaving our afternoons free to visit paper shops and artists. And our first stop was in the upper food court at the Kyoto train station, where Eriko Horiki, a paper artist who has done installation and lighting work all over Japan, created this ceiling installation piece. So this is made of paper. And I ran into another piece by her just in Kyoto. She's done a lot of work all over Japan. Masa is a regular tour guide and leads themed tours, not paper tours. So we did his Kyoto Zen tour one day and visited the famous Ryoanji Rock Garden and Kinkakuji, the Golden Pavilion. Masa knows the abbot at Zuio-hin, located in a vast complex which hosts a large number of Zen temples. After viewing the gardens, the abbot served us tea and answered our questions about the temple and his life there. After a delicious lunch on the temple grounds, several of us wandered through the streets of Kyoto to a fabric shop, an indigo shop, where we got to see vats of indigo, and we ended up at Morita Washi. This is one of several paper shops in Kyoto. I tried to hit all the ones I knew of. I think there were 4 or 5. We did have the afternoons and evenings free to wander, and I was amazed that there was a craftsperson working in a huge department store showcasing how he wove bamboo strips, which were then fabricated into these trays that you could purchase at the store. Never seen anything like that in America. It was like a craft show in a department store. And they had a whole floor dedicated to crafts. We did take a day trip to Nara, the former capital of Japan and a UNESCO World Heritage City. Our first stop was at Todaiji, which features the Great Buddha Hall, housing the world's largest bronze statue of Buddha by Rokana. We had lunch at the Nara Hotel, of architectural interest and built for visiting dignitaries in 1909. Helen Keller and Albert Einstein among them, and us, of course. On our final day of touring, we walked through a lovely neighborhood and garden to Arashiyama, a stunning bamboo grove. And the picture on the right was just about to burst into bloom with lotus flowers. So we had to imagine it, but we like the pink one you see here. So at least we saw a few at another site so we could envision what that grove above was going to look like. That afternoon, we visited the Chushin Art Museum, where I'd set up a visit with the artist Kyoko Ibe, who met us and talked about her work in handmade paper. This was a real treat to see her, and she had this museum show at the same time we were there, which was amazing, and she talked to us. And then on our last morning, there's Gina. Most of the group visited Karamaru, a shop where they practice the karakami style of woodblock printing, which involves placing a sheet of paper on top of the block. They have a collection of 300-year-old wood blocks and hand rubbing each print. We participated in their printing experience. And this was a place I'd accidentally stumbled upon in 2019. At the end of our session, the master printer showed us how he prints Fusuma door panels, which requires 24 passes and a lot of moving the paper around with perfect registration. So he's printing this entire sheet, one block at a time, and he's lining them up using those weights. You can just kind of see the printing is very similar in color to the paper, but he's already printed 4 blocks there. And then our final farewell party took place later that day, beginning with a tour of Sarah Brayer's studio, which is on the property of Masa and Sarah's house. Sarah produces a lot of her work in Etchizen at Taki Mill, which we just visited. She uses glow-in-the-dark pigment too. We got to go in a little room and see the work glow. These are her gorgeous studio doors. We took a quick tour of the gardens and a tea house that Masa built on their property. And then we moved into the house for dinner. Masa and his assistants prepared dinner for us, which was a real treat. And we were seated at the table in front of the Fusuma door panels that were pulp painted by Sarah. She does a lot of commissions. And so just picture this. Masa opened those doors to unveil a room behind them. And a geiko, this is the name for geisha in Kyoto, was sitting there in front of a wall of shoji screens. So this is that same room. She performed 3 dances for us and answered our questions. And we all headed out on our own ways the next morning. And I'm showing you this picture of luggage because if you don't know about this service in Japan, they ship your luggage between hotels. And for between $10 and $20, you can just have your luggage shipped so that you don't have to deal with it in the train station and on the streets. It's very convenient. And Masa recommended that, and I can see why, because we had a group of 10 or 11 going through train stations, switching trains. It would have been really tricky with the tight train schedules if we all had luggage. So just a few more things I wanted to show you. So you've probably seen these little inflatables that are Japanese. This was in a shop in Japan. And I have been fascinated with this structure of how they're made. I've taught people how to do it, and I've used it in my own work. This is a community piece I made called Look Inside. Each of the 6 spheres you see has a hole in the side, and when you look inside, you peer into a mirror. Each sphere represents a way in which we inhabit the world. And as you walk around the piece, your position changes. And you're invited to reflect on yourself, your relationships, your family, your communities, our planet, and our universe. How do you think about yourself as an individual and as a member of our world? What bothers you? What delights you? What questions do you have? How will you contribute? And so when this has been exhibited, people are invited to write onto this tablecloth and answer those questions. Now, back to the Akari lanterns. During COVID, I started thinking about my children and their generation as they reached adulthood. They were both in college, and both of them had to move during that time. And I thought a lot about myself at their same stage and how it took a lot of courage to step into the light. This is the name of this piece. To come into your own, to claim your ground, to simply find yourself. And personally, every time I've taken a risk or stepped into the light, opportunities have presented themselves to me. So I created a model for the lantern. And then I connected with a library in Denver who shared my vision and helped me make it a reality. This is a very abbreviated version, but I created the piece as part of their summer programming in 2022. And this was a temporary installation. So last slides, I have a studio in Red Cliff, Colorado. I host 3 workshops a year in the studio, 2 papermaking master classes and 1 retreat called the Red Cliff Paper Retreat. As Jane mentioned, I write a blog called The Sunday Paper. The links for this is in the chat also, so you can sign up to receive it if you're interested. And I feature all kinds of things every week, including books about paper, artwork, just things that are going on with paper, surprisingly. I've been doing it for over 10 years, and I will never run out of content. I also host a podcast called Paper Talk. Those come out once every 3 weeks. And I run a membership program called the Paper Year. I think Jane said this was paper making, but it's not. It's paper projects. So we don't make paper in this group. Some of us do, but this is for anyone who wants to work with paper. And we learn a new technique and have guest artists, and we meet on Zoom, and it's a wonderful community. And then I also have a popular online class called Weave Through Winter, which takes place every February. If you're interested in weaving, paper weaving, and we incorporated daily practice, so we weave every day throughout the month of February. So back to the tour, just my wrap up. I'd never done anything like this, organizing, planning, and leading a tour. And it actually was better than I expected. Yay. And I loved being in Japan. My son is now working for the Japanese consulate in Detroit. So maybe he'll end up in Japan. And I do hope to go back. And I'm considering a tour, as I said, in October of probably 2026. If anybody's interested, I have a list, quite a long list of people who are interested, but I'm just taking names. You can send me an email. And thank you so much.
Helen, this is Jane. I'm pretty speechless. That tour looks, as Gina described it, simply magical. And what a wonderful opportunity for everyone that was involved in it. And I know there are a few people from the tour that are on this Zoom call. And if any of you would like to unmute yourself and just say a few words about your experience, we'd love to hear that. But, you know, as I was listening to you, I was reflecting on that goal that you stated on your webpage, which is to make paper come alive through art, collaboration, education, and innovation. And you have certainly achieved that. Very inspirational. So if anyone would like to share a thought about the tour, if you were on it, or have a question for Helen before we leave, we would love to hear from you.
I'm going to spotlight Helen Spielman.
Great.
Hi, Helen.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I was so privileged to go on this tour. And what I want to just share with everyone is that I'm a book artist and a paper artist. And I told Helen before we went that I really wasn't interested in the paper making part. And to my shock and surprise, that turned out to be the most fascinating part to me. And what I think Helen didn't mention is that some of those paper makers we saw were 8th and 9th generation paper makers. It was just like a dance to watch them make paper in these traditional ways. They work in total silence all day long. And it was just beautiful and amazing. And for someone who has never put together a tour before, Helen was just amazing, organized, kind, and fantastic. And it was one of the highlights. I have traveled a lot, and going to Japan on this tour was one of the highlights of my travel life.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm envious, I can say. I have a quick question for you, Helen. Early on in one of the first stops, you talked about a woman who stopped and sang a paper-making song to you. And I was intrigued about that, and also about the goddess of paper. Maybe you could give a little bit of insight, because that's just so charming and also so important to the Japanese culture.
Yeah, well, the woman who stopped, I did record the song, but it was pretty long, so I didn't want to play it today. It was 2 or 3 minutes. And I never got a translation of it, so I don't know what she was saying, but it was just so charming, and she was so passionate, and that there was a paper making song. I don't really know the history. And the paper goddess there's actually something, I've never seen this, further up the mountain, that they bring down in a procession every year on a certain date to the shrine. And Gina, if you know more about it.
Well, I just wanted to show,
Yeah, she made
I
a
looked
piece.
up the goddess, and then I made her out of some of the papers that I brought back from Etchizen.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Beautiful.
show that since we're talking
So
about her.
it's an old tale that this woman started paper making, something like that, centuries ago.
That she pointed out I think she pointed out the plants that would be good for paper making.
Right.
I think that was the story. Yeah.
Amazing. You talked a little bit about your retail therapy in Japan. How did you have excess baggage on the way home?
Yes.
Yeah, I managed to, I rolled everything on a tube. I brought one tube with me, and then I was traveling home. I said several of us were from Colorado, and one person didn't shop at all, and she had an extra bag. So I'm like, hey, can I put some paper in your extra bag?
Oh, I thought I'd give you the experience of the umbrella opening. I didn't buy one of the big ones, but I bought
Good.
the little
Oh,
one.
yeah.
I'll do that.
Yeah, they had these for sale, these beautiful
Yes.
little small ones.
Beautiful, Gina.
Thank you, Gina.
But I had to buy an extra bag in
You
Etchizen,
did.
the first
Right.
week. I thought, I'm not going to buy very much. I have a lot of paper at home.
Yeah.
Luckily, there was a mall down the street from our hotel, and they had inexpensive, duffel bags. So I got one.
Right. Several people did that. Yeah.
Well, we're getting to the end of our time, and Helen, that was just such an inspirational talk, and what a great way to end our series for 2024 with your insights and reflections on Japanese paper making. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And just to put a shout out that Puget Sound Book Artists is currently sending information to members to renew membership. And if you are not a member, we hope that you will consider joining us on February 9th. We will be having our annual membership meeting, and our guest speaker will be Rebecca Shamlee. And I think many of you know her from her wonderful books inspired by nature. And we will be restarting our spring series in March with the wonderful Lori Moorhead talking about her own work. So we're looking forward to connecting with you in the new year. And I want to thank all of you, and especially Gina, Lori, and Helen, inspiration. And I hope some of those workshops are open to beginning paper makers.
Which workshops?
That you offer.
Oh, yeah. I teach all levels. Yeah.
Excellent.
So
Excellent.
yes, anything is for everyone. Yes.
Thank you all. And thank you, Linda, for that final comment. It's great. Linda Marshall runs Washi Paper. So for those of you that are interested in learning more, please visit her site as well. And Helen, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was really fun.
I just want to say Linda Marshall also dropped into the chat that Helen has recent podcasts interviewing two people deeply involved with Japanese paper, Paul Denhode.
Yep.
And Nancy Jacoby. So you can look for those in her podcasts, which are wonderful.
And I've also interviewed Nick Cladis, who gave us the tour, and Sarah Breyer. So if you go back in time, you'll find those episodes as well.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. Have a good end of the year and a Thanksgiving and holiday season.